Hi, nice to see you again.
Drop you already the link so that you can add yourself to the meeting minutes and notes. And then as usual, we will give the people 2-3 more minutes to join.
Hello. Well, I joined as this with the official tag account. It's
You joined as tag.
Yeah. Now I can stop and start the recordings. Even nice. We have the power. It's not automized anymore. We have the power to start it. Max, do you like to host?
Oh yeah, I can do so.
Okay. Nice.
Then I have to turn on the light. It don't look like a tomato. That should be fine. Anyone up to taking notes?
I'll take notes today, Matt.
Perfect. Thank you very much for this. Again, we dropped the link to the notes in the chat. You can do it again if you want. Please add yourself to the attendees list. And then in around about a minute, we will get started. Alrighty, we have 3 minutes past. With that, we can get started with our today's tag. Today we have June the 7th, 2023. My name is Max. I will be the host for today. As this is a CNCF meeting, we are following the CNCF Code of Conduct, which means in the end it boils down to be awesome and excellent to each other. I've seen that we have already a few new joiners or first-time joiners. If you want to take a minute to shortly introduce yourself, you can unmute yourself and drop some words.
Hello, first time here, Dave Neary. I work for Ampere Computing and very interested in Kepler on ARM64.
Nice, welcome.
Where do you work? Sorry, I'm trying to make sure.
Ampere Computing.
Ampere, got it.
Ampere, like the unit of current, or the French physicist.
Cool. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ross Fairbanks. I'm an advisor stroke volunteer at Greenwood Foundation, which is separate to Green Software Foundation, but kind of board members as well. I think Chris Adams from there has been in touch as well. But been interested in carbon wire scheduling for a long time, and also keen to learn more about SCI as well.
Fantastic to have you. Anyone else? Alrighty. With that, we will move on with the agenda. You can see it's quite active. So if you have any kind of topic which you would like to address or would like to discuss, as usual, you can add it under the new items, give it in the bracket your name, and then the topic which you would like to follow up, discuss, introduce, highlight, whatsoever. With that, moving on straight to the working group updates. Do we have anyone from comms in? Don't see Kara. Other than that, I would say we maybe directly jump over to the proposal for a new working group, which is Nikki and Leo.
And Christina, yeah.
And Christina,
so,
sorry.
Yeah, it's the idea is to create a new working group. GreenOps is the name that we proposed, but we can definitely discuss this. It was previously called kind of tools and practices, but we never went through with creating it. It was more of a floating idea for a few months now. Please read through the issue. Please drop any feedback, ideas that you have. I think Leo already provided an idea to further define GreenOps, definitely. We've also discussed it in Slack. That's part of the challenge, exactly, to define GreenOps. Please comment. And now we're in the phase of just gathering feedback and getting the word out there before we move on with the next steps. So, any questions already before we move on to something else, or any comments? Anyone super excited?
Could you throw this link in the chat, please, so people can follow?
Yep.
Thank you.
Lovely, great.
Maybe one
Alrighty.
last comment to the working group. So I think this proposal is very nice. I like it, especially in the cloud native field. I think like if we hear something about sustainability, every second discussion is about green ops or some kind of green ops thing. Maybe you call it also DevSasOps or something similar, which I think is kind of similar. So I think we are in a very good position as a tag to have a discussion what it actually is and drive this discussion with the community. So I think this is like exactly our role in the tag, and having a working group which focuses directly on this topic, I think makes a lot of sense. So I'm interested what other people feel about the term, but also in general about this space.
Yeah, and to further introduce, maybe I should add a little bit. The idea for the working group is to provide examples of cloud native environmental sustainability. That's kind of the TLDR. So it's to focus in a vendor neutral way on requirements, standards, practices, etc., such as the carbon aware scheduling with GETA that Ross posted in the channel. So these kind of examples and showcasing them, discussing them, having demos, etc. Yeah, that's the idea, to have a forum for technical discussions and around tooling and patterns.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of our initiatives right now are also focused around comms and communication and organizing, I don't know, meetups and things like that. And I think this is very important. So I think the working group comms makes a lot of sense, because we need to gather more information also where this space is going. But we also already have some knowledge and projects and tools. So like both working groups and maybe, I don't know, in the future, some others as well, makes a lot of sense. So we don't have just communication, but also technical depth in our work.
Fantastic. If you want to be part of it,
quick
you can. Sorry, but if you want to be part of the working group, you can drop your interest on the GitHub issue, comment directly on the proposal. In the issue, you will find also a link to one of the docs, where you can also comment and give more feedback. Sorry, Jochen, for interrupting.
yeah, what's our timeline here? Because I just saw that this has been created 4 hours ago. How long do we have to comment and participate in the discussion?
Usually proposals should be at least 2 weeks open. So if you see in 2 weeks no big movement anymore, then whatever will be the outcome, this will be the outcome. If something is unclear, then we will utilize maybe the meeting in 2 weeks exactly to dig down on the open topics, on the open discussion points, and maybe find then a common sense on how this group should be formalized and move on.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Does any timeline exist past that point? Like once we've created that, do we? Probably not. Just out of curiosity.
The work group is typically, the work group itself often does not have very much any kind of restricted timeline. It can have a restricted timeline if you think in like a term of a project, but we treat the working groups usually as like a bucket of topics which we collect within that, right? So to give to the work group itself a timeline most likely will not happen. To add a timeline to the projects within that most likely will have, yes.
What would help me, I think, with these things is making sure that we outline with every working group the deliverables that they're responsible for, because that'll make it easier for it to determine if we need to change focus or something. So just strong requests for deliverables being outlined.
Yeah, this must be given anyhow for the work group before we can accept it and make it official. Cool. Again, you're very welcome. Take a look on the issue, take a look on the document, drop your ideas, thoughts. You wish to participate, and then you can, together with Nikki, Christina, and Leo, push this topic onwards. So I see there's an open question about the hackathon discussion. What do you wonder, or if you wonder what is the hackathon discussion, you can find also in GitHub an issue on that. 2-sentence summary. We have the idea to start building a kind of hackathon together, or like a workshop, better to say, for running them on different events. The idea behind it is that we most likely will not have enough topics overall to have a full track on something like a KubeCon, right? Because the topic is maybe fast moving. There were maybe a lot of topics, but overall, in comparison to other sectors like security or observability, we are quite in the early stage and do not have that huge amount of topics itself. So the idea was like, maybe we can run alongside all these tracks some kind of sustainability workshops, hackathons, whatsoever. You can find there a very long rundown on the topics which we have discussed. And we have decided actually for 2 topics which we want to start with to work on some kind of hands-on workshop. The idea is that it is written and described in a way that everyone can utilize this. So if you're running a meetup and you would like to do a 1 or 2 hours workshop on one of these topics, then you can just like check out our repository, go and sit with the people together and work through it, right? It is also the idea to have different building blocks. So the workshop, like 8 hours, is not focusing one and only on one topic, but that we have multiple topics. for now, we don't want to build everything at the same time and have more like a try and test run to work on some of these topics to get a feeling for it. How much effort is it? Can we provide it in the way that we believe it's helpful, and that we can run it on any kind of the events? Right. There's also the question, do we want to split the work on that? The work is kind of splitted. As I said, we have two major topics which we are going to work on right now. And what conference we are targeting. Yes, KubeCon NA would be great. I think we need for this one also discuss on the logistics, like who would be on the KubeCon NA and who would love to execute this workshops. Because I think we have also quite big user base or people who are driving this community located in Europe and also some part in the Asian realm area. And so maybe we do not have enough people to execute it on the KubeCon NA. So we have to clarify here some logistics before we can really nail it down. Other than that, overall, again, it's a target to provide a set of mini hackathons so that we can put them into a meetup, that we put them into a little conference, that we can put it into a large conference. We should be dynamic and flexible with this, and to enable and allow people who are interested in this topic to play around, get a first feeling, talk with the people about it, make an exchange on it, and make up their own mind.
Just wanted to share some feedback that I mentioned this we're organizing Kubernetes Community Days Norway next year. And I mentioned this because we have 1 day of workshops. So I mentioned that we have this in the planning and the feedback was really positive. So already there is some interest for that. This could have been very cool to use some of the hackathons we make to have them as part of the day 1 workshop. And I think it could be super cool to get this in place and also kind of spread awareness about the tag and what we are doing here and kind of use some outputs of the work we do in tag also in such settings. So do check out the GitHub issue.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's awesome. I think for other KCDs which are organized, it's maybe a little bit on the shorthand, and we should take our time also to get it ready. I think it would be worse if we have hackathons, workshops, however we want to call them. I like a little bit the wording of hackathon because the idea is really like group people together and make them discuss and explore together how does this work, right? It's maybe also important that we do not want to achieve something where you just like copy paste commands and that's it. The learning experience, the exchange on this topic would be very poor. So nevertheless, there's a whole meeting protocol. I even believe it's recorded. Don't know how we can upload it. There's a GitHub issue. Have a look. If you're interested, feel free to comment, feel free to join. And yeah, if there's no further questions.
Yeah,
or
Chen
comments?
has a comment in the chat. Would this be better? Would this be under the umbrella of the comms working group?
Could be. Could be. I think we have not decided yet under which work group it should be, but I think comms would be the best place for it, I guess. All right. With that, moving onwards, I'm very glad and happy that today we have with us Henry from the Green Software Foundation, or part of the Green Software Foundation. And he will give us today an introduction to the SCI, the Software Carbon Intensity specification. What does it do? How does it work? And what we can do out of it. So, Henry, you should be able to share your screen if you want to.
Absolutely. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Let me start messing with my screens a bit. Let's see if that works. I have a full presentation. this seems like a very knowledgeable group, so I don't know that I necessarily need to go through it in detail, but I thought I'd sketch some stuff out. Is there anything you all want me to cover in particular, or do you have specific questions that would be helpful?
I think our group covers all kind of experience, from first-time joiner and I like the topic to, hey, I've implemented Kepler and other tools which we use for it. So everything is given. Feel free to start with everything you like to. And oh, sorry, Leo.
Maybe one question. So I think and we've been talking about this, I think also at KubeCon and also in other meetings, using the SCI maybe to evaluate cloud native projects for their carbon intensity, and maybe also integrating the SCI in a pipeline or in some setting. So with release over release, you can see in which way features, for example, or changes in general impact the sustainability of the project. So maybe maybe this is like, I don't know if I think it's like more an introduction to the SCI, and maybe this would be more of like an advanced use case or something like this. So I'm not sure if you cover that. In general, everything, also like a general introduction, I think is very, very interesting. So
interesting. So like an advanced use case. So So maybe I have these principles here, which we've essentially identified 3 areas that we think software can affect sustainability or emissions. And then that leads into how and why we structured the SCI score and the formula for how we get there. And then I have a couple other resources like the patterns, which might be really interesting to your green ops conversation. So I think I can dip into each of those pretty quickly. Does that make sense?
sounds good. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So to go through it quickly, I think this explains it well. So what is green software? And those are the 3 fundamental actions. And then the SCI is essentially how you measure it, because we looking at those levers, we'd love to hear if there are more actions. And then just some other projects that I think might be helpful. So after, I don't know, Asim formed the Green Software Foundation maybe 2 years ago now, or at least had conversations about it. And as part of those conversations with everyone and talking through it, we identified 3 areas where we think you can affect emissions with software, all under the umbrella of carbon efficiency. And that's either energy efficiency, hardware efficiency, and carbon awareness. So we think that any action that you come up with that affects software to make it more sustainable would fall into one of these 3 categories. So if you have a strategy like changing the location of where you train a machine learning project, it would fall into the carbon awareness category. If you use a different type of hardware, that would fall into hardware efficiency or things like that, or energy efficiency potentially to perform the same task. So hardware efficiency is really straightforward. It's, well, hardware embodied emissions or embodied carbon is really what we're talking about here. So can you use less hardware to perform the same task you were doing? That's what we would consider hardware efficiency. For consumer devices, embodied emissions are kind of the primary source of emissions. And so really here we've seen 2 broad categories, which is extend the life of that hardware, use it more so you don't require the new hardware, which causes emissions, and then increase the utilization of that hardware so you require less of it overall. And then hardware efficiency is really, energy efficiency is, can your code consume less energy when it runs? And so you consume less energy overall with that code, and thus causing less emissions. And this is just a breakdown. So finally, we get to carbon awareness, which is really 2 primary ideas. Can you be specific in where your hardware runs so that causes less emissions, or when it runs so that it causes less emissions? And so that's really relatively straightforward, like citing workloads in clean locations, or looking at the temporal variation of carbon emissions throughout the day and actually scheduling those jobs if you have that flexibility. And amongst these three categories, we've seen that different types of software have different types of flexibility. When you view a website, you need it right now. There's no time varying flexibility, but the services you use to deliver that website could be located in different places or things like that. So you can pick and choose your strategies and the categories that they fall into based on the like constraints of specific hardware. So that led us to, okay, so how do you know if you're making progress when you are developing a piece of software? And so there's a kind of a refinement we took, which is like, oh, the carbon emissions from my software are 34 tons. Now the carbon are 52 tons. That doesn't tell you that much. So we actually keyed in on the idea of using a per functional unit or per user. So then you know, to deliver this service per user, I'm causing this much carbon. If I make improvements to it, even if the service grows or shrinks, independently, I can tell if my actions are cleaning it up. And so we came up with the SCI score, and it's really split into three parts. So there's the operational emissions, so the emissions caused during the operations of that software, and then the embodied emissions, or the construction emissions, which come from the construction or the manufacturing of that hardware. And so the energy is really where you can affect it through the energy efficiency. So any of those three actions will affect one of these levers and your score will go down. So the energy, obviously, if you increase the energy efficiency, the E factor goes down, so your score goes down or your rating goes down. And the carbon intensity is affected by timing and location. So if you locate in a cleaner place, the I will reduce, reducing your overall score. And similarly, if you use less hardware or hardware that requires less emissions, your M will reduce as well. And then this is kind of the functional unit to make sure it's scalable and that you're cross comparing. I went through that really quickly because I wanted to, like, sounds like you have the background on the three principles that we talked about, but this is the actual score itself and talking through some of the different pieces here. And really, we think this encompasses most use cases and most use cases and most strategies. So any action should be reflected in this score. Any questions here? Do you want me to dive into anything more deeper?
Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Have you made any progress regarding the scaling unit?
Regarding-
Because like last year, I think, when I checked your documentation the last time, you gave a bunch of examples, but not like any advice on when to use which. Did you like make any progress on that?
Do you mean like strategies?
Yeah, kind of. So what I'm interested in is comparability, right? And I want to make sure that I use the right scaling unit for my use case, and
Yes.
most likely competitors of mine. If I want to compare my own solution to another one from another vendor, they should use the same one, right? But if we use different ones because we just can pick and choose whichever one gives us the best numbers, then that concept kind of falls apart, right? The comparability then won't really work.
Your timing,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Your timing couldn't be more impeccable. So not only is functional unit really important, but also the boundary, like what do you include in that operations? Like one organization could include the networking software and another might just include the CPUs, right? So understanding that boundary is really important. And comparability is something we've struggled with a lot. You could have different eyes, you could have different hardware. So we've actually just started a project scoping out what it would look like to make like a test bed for software so that you had to run your software under the same load conditions on the same hardware with a standardized I factor. You know how the EPA has miles per gallon ratings for vehicles? And it's like, this has 48 city MPG and 52 highway MPG, right? No one actually drives their car like that, but they test all cars in an identical way with no headwind, same speed, etc., to get that score. So we're exploring whether it would be possible to do something similar for hardware, for software, where you said you have to use this Dell server, you have to run these 4 software tests, and then extract a score from that, so that you can then, as someone who's procuring software, can say, okay, how did the 4 softwares I'm considering score? And also, if I'm developing software, am I improving compared to my peers? The SCI alone will tell you, am I taking actions to improve my hardware? It won't help you with comparability. So this is a much larger project on like, how do we tighten down the constraints on each of these factors strong enough that the test is comparable? And I think we're starting to approach it from the other end. I don't think we'll ever be able to make the score itself strict enough to be comparable. You'd have to require so many different things so very specifically. But then if you have a test bed that lays out exactly the hardware, the function, not even the functional unit, but also the function, like the data that you're processing, I think we can get to that. And if you'd like to contribute to that, literally this week, next week, we're scoping out, sketching out whether it would be possible to set a test like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Thank you very much.
Would you be interested in participating? We literally, like 2 weeks ago, someone had the idea of using this approach. Last week, we kind of discussed it, and I think next week, or sorry, tomorrow, we're planning to run through a test case, like pick a software, sketch out which hardware, what the test would be, just to see if it's possible to make it that strict.
Yeah, that sounds great. Unfortunately, I feel really busy, but I see if I can fit it into my schedule.
Great, I'll make sure the meeting information is available. Nikki, it sounds like you had a question.
Great.
I think Marlo was first.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Marlo?
Yeah. So when you talk about running those test beds, I'm assuming that your numbers will change according to the amount of network traffic. Are you measuring for like the entire environment, or are you going to measure just for the server? Because then you're going to miss, for instance, network stuff. So for me, I think you have to measure the whole data center to eliminate that. And the second part of that is the type of workload you run will change potentially how stuff performs. So if you're running on a particular infrastructure and you're running an AI ML type thing versus if you're running a RAN process versus if you're running, just plain old compute, I think that's going to be you're going to have differences in how you perform with different products.
Absolutely. And I think this goes back to the EPA comparison. Like, no one drives their car at exactly 50 miles an hour on a sunny day with no headwind. But like, we need to define those conditions exactly the same across different conditions so that you are running the same compute load, you are running the same networking load, right? Does that make sense? Like, we really want to get rid of all those extraneous factors so that you can say, under idealized, or not even idealized conditions, under standardized conditions, how does the software perform? Of course, I'm going to drive the software in completely different ways than it is tested under. But at least that allows me to compare it to other similar software because they'll be using the same test conditions.
What I'm suggesting is that you do types of workloads. So if you look at how LinPack is run, right? There's different types of workloads or different types of ways that you can beat those benchmarks, right? You'll do better at those benchmarks. So if you do benchmarks on different systems, you'll have different ones will perform better in certain areas. And I think having it so that you can understand, especially according to the types of workloads you're running, what would be best for you is going to help you more than having a generalized. I don't think generalized will do well for specialty workloads, which aren't as specialty as we think they are, because there's a huge RAN market, there's a huge AI ML market, and increasing with ChatGPT. So, yeah.
That makes total sense. We would love your suggestions in the working group that is working on this. I think one of the other things there is, I think we haven't figured out how to solve this for data centers yet. Like that's one of the big questions. Like it's easy to do it for a isolated piece of software that you can either run locally or on a client server or client system. What does that look like in a data center? How do you do that? And we're measuring the software itself, not the system. Does that distinction make sense? Or at least that's what we're discussing currently. Like I am making a photo editing software. What are the tests needed to run that photo editing software? And is that can we do that on a standardized system, whether it's going to run on a laptop or a desktop at home? Is that, how can we translate that to whatever other software is running at a data center level?
Yeah, it makes
think
sense.
we're
I'll go join the working group because we could debate all day and I don't want to take all the time.
Oh, I don't think I think you have great suggestions, and I don't know how to properly respond to them, and I think the working group would really appreciate hearing that. Thank you for the suggestion, Nikki.
Yeah, I have a three-part question. So my first one is regarding the working group that is for the SCI and the Green Software Foundation. Are those meetings open to the public? Because I think that they are only open to members, like people who are in organizations, companies that are part of the foundation. So I don't know if there's if that has changed. Maybe if you want to answer that before I move on to my next question.
I'm not entirely sure what the rules are, but I think you're allowed to be a contributor to that working group. As we just have to make sure that it's papered appropriately because it's open source. So any ideas brought to the group have to be contributed in open source. So I think there might be some paperwork involved in that or some contribution agreement. Sean can probably get us straightened out on that. He's our Linux Foundation representative.
Okay, thank you. Basically the other part of what I'd like to ask is, at which point do you see the SEI calculation be implemented in the process of developing software? For example, Max mentioned in the chat that there's been ideas of looking at CNCF projects. Like I recently did something on Flux and Argo CD looking at energy consumption. Maybe you could extend that to look at the whole SCI. So maybe it could be part of a graduation process in the CNCF if there's a project that is, in that process. So what are your thoughts on this? How can we make this a reality, a specification, a calculation that is part of the dev process?
Absolutely. We have seen people do it at different phases. And I think what we've seen is that it's when it is most useful to developers to make decisions. And it happens at different resolutions. So deciding on an architecture might happen before other processes or decision making. You can go in later, calculate the score, and then retrofit certain parts of the code to identify strategies. What we have tried to push people away from is just measuring it and then walking away from it towards measuring it, identifying a strategy, implementing that strategy, running it again. So it kind of grows with the software. And so that was a Weasley way of me not answering your question. But I think it's like when it is most useful. I hope that's cheating enough.
I don't have the answers either, for what it's worth. So, yeah.
If you're making decisions, we see this SEI itself without the comparability component as very much so a tool for developers to identify strategies that will reduce the score. So like increasing utilization, whatever it is. And so it needs to be matched to their process. I think that's where the SDK comes in and a lot of the other tooling that will help calculate it more seamlessly so that it can become a tool for making those decisions more smoothly. Dave?
Hi. So your primary goal is comparing software, like comparing software, perhaps software versions or things like that, rather than comparing hardware. Like, do I consume less if I'm running on a different CPU, or if I'm using SSDs instead of regular disk drives? You know, what is the focus really software over hardware? Like, I feel like hardware would be the easier way to increase your efficiency.
No, not at all. Sorry. Our software itself does not create emissions, right? But it is the manufacturing of hardware and the energy consumption that creates emissions to run that hardware. Sorry, that software. We are the Green Software Foundation. It's in our title, but we are trying to affect to reduce emissions from both of those sources. And I think the comparability score has to be constrained much more than the SCI score itself applied to any software. So the SCI is used as a tool for any developer to reduce emissions from their software, whether that's through hardware or energy consumption. The comparability score will have to be much stricter, and we don't know what hardware that software is going to run on in a comparability score. So we're essentially predetermining it in a very strict way, or we're talking about predetermining it in a very strict way that wouldn't happen in the SCI, where if you're calculating the SCI for your own software and not thinking about comparability, you should always be using more efficient hardware. You should always be doing it at times and locations that's cleaner and on hardware that requires less emissions to create. That's how you improve your score. If you're doing the comparability test, which hasn't been defined yet, some of those levers are not available to you. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Ocean?
Yes, I hope the connection is stable. So the two things. First, if I can't make it, make sure that whoever's in that meeting knows about the Umweltcampus Trier, which is a German university who have been working on this for a couple of years now. They published a method to surveillance client applications already, and they have quite interesting results published about that already. If you need any links, do send me your email and I'll forward some of them to you. And also, they are now in the midst of working on a client server based approach. Hope that the wind isn't too strong and you can still hear me.
Just out of curiosity, let me see if we have been discussing a lot of this extensively. Let me see if I can pull this up. That would have been the meeting on the 1st. I'll send this link out to everyone. We took notes in a Google Doc here, which is someone from, I can't remember where they're from, Blue Angels and Spec Power. So we were looking for examples of this already happening. So getting those links would be very helpful.
The Blue Angel is based on that research that I just mentioned.
Excellent. So I think we're just adding another level, and I think we want to extend what they're doing. Exactly. Take what they've done and say, not only the software that they're talking about, but all the softwares, or more categories. Actually, let me pull this up as well. So the SCI is drafted by the Green Software Foundation Standards Working Group, and then there's a separate repository for the SCI itself, but this is where all those discussions are happening, and you can actually see in the issues. You can see our upcoming meeting tomorrow. On the agenda, we have a presentation from someone at Etsy, and then also we're talking about this scoping discussion around software emissions benchmarks. That's it. Sorry, I didn't mean to send that. I meant to send this to everyone.
Looking into time, last question to Nikki.
How can the tag help in this endeavor? What can we do to contribute in the long term, kind of like examples, use cases, anything else? How can we collaborate?
Absolutely. Right now, I think you've hit on the two primary categories that we're really excited about, which is if you implement the SCI and then make improvements on software, the Green Software Foundation would love to write about that. Like, look, people are using it and they made these improvements. We're helping people make those improvements. So if you implement any of the patterns or anything, which I'll also bring up, like, tell us about it. We'll help you tell that story. And then if you're interested in contributing to the working group, I have found that there's a core group of people who show up consistently, discuss it, and then write things down. And we're always looking for people in that core group who are excited about contributing meaningfully. Like having ideas, drafting actual language, coming up with test beds. Does that make sense?
I also would like to link here again back to the issue which we have posted earlier. We'll post it again. It's the issue ticket 64, where we also linked up or communicating also with some of the GSF for discussing about how we can practically implement a kind of like approach baseline, similar to what you have explained, how we can find on the one way a kind of common SCI specification, just that the projects can compare themselves to previous releases. This is maybe not a 100% SCI compliant version, because for some stuff it's like theoretically it would be enough to just have a power consumption maybe, and then on the second step, which is way more complicated, to consider the whole process around the open source project itself and to be way more precise to know like, okay, our test bed is running in North Virginia whatsoever, utilizing that and that kind of pipelines and so on and so forth. So to consider then the end-to-end. But obviously this is like on a complexity level, a couple of steps ahead of us.
I think, yeah, it's something that we're grappling with right now. And so any thoughts you have, especially in this issue, we might steal it from, we'll definitely link to it so that it gets tracked.
Ideally, we do it together because we found already an open source project which would like to be the research candidate for testing those things out.
Fabish, it sounds like you've been talking to CLJ, Chris Lloyd-Jones. Is that correct? Fabulous. Yeah. Before I take off, I just want to make sure everyone had seen the patterns page on the Green Software Foundation, which is really just a list of all the different strategies folks have identified to reduce emissions from.
Can you put a link to this, please?
Absolutely. And then let me just quickly check my presentation projects. The SCI is what we talked about primarily today. We've also talked about the SDK briefly. CLJ is working on a improvement to the SDK along with some other folks in open source, pretty major undertaking. And then the principles and patterns is here as well. I think we already had question and answer, and you very tactfully limited us. So is there anything else we want to touch on, or should I hand it back?
Max, I think we might need another working group.
Why? Just more or less commonly free to put this on the clean ops for our implementation, and we put it on the comms for working closer with the GSF.
Oh, right. There are 2 groups to rule them all. Sounds good.
And if it's not enough, then we will find more. But I think that it's getting too complicated. All right. Any burning question from your side for Henry?
No, I'd be very excited to collaborate both on the case study, like real world examples, and the use you as a brain trust to improve the comparability score.
I do have a question about the patterns. Last time I checked, you didn't give any guidance on like how much of an impact to expect from these, and just from reading them, I expect there to be quite a few differences in the impact, right? So some changes or some patterns may have a bigger impact and then bigger effect than others. Is there anything planned on giving guidance or helping developers prioritize?
I don't know if there's actually a prioritization queue for that. It's also really hard to know without knowing what the software is, whether it'll have a big impact. Like changing the timing of certain things will have no effect, or how big is your user base? It would have to be done in percentages. I don't know how much of your huge load is flexible is one of the key questions. So I don't actually know. That's a good question.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Exactly.
I think this is the typical use case of it depends on.
Right.
If you have found it out, I think the GSF documentation is open enough to contribute back. And if there's kind of common pattern or use cases, which could be as a reference, I think you guys are more than happy to get some feedback here.
Or if you add patterns, you're like, hey, you missed this strategy. Put it as a pull request, and I think we can add it.
Yeah. Loving that discussion. I see very huge interest here. But we have a few more short topics which we want to wrap up before everyone has to run. Therefore, I give and hand over the mic to Leo.
Yes, so just some very brief discussion. So in the past, we wanted to upload all these recordings now for ages, and we are finally have access to all the recordings, and we have our YouTube account, so we can now establish some automation. I know that I think from the working group GitOps sustainability, I think, Nikki, right? There was some practice how they did, I think with Zapier, some tool to automatically upload the recordings from Zoom to YouTube. So maybe we can establish this process, or we can start using YouTube live streams. So either way, I think now we can do some automation so the recordings are available afterwards. We have been also merging a new blog post process so we had, and I think most of us are aware, so a couple of months ago we had a blog post, and someone was working on it, and we had quite some problems because we were missing governance and some processes, how to deal with that. And we have been now working on it, and it's merged. And I think this is like a very straightforward process where you just open up an issue, and the issue guides you through the reviewing and proposal and so on. And this process just makes sure that we agree beforehand on the scope, on the goals and deliverables, before we actually dive into the writing part of a blog post. So if you have any ideas, anything which you would like to work on, feel free to open up an issue, start a blog post.
Leo, I have a question to that. Is this currently open only to kind of us who are members of the tag, or could an external person who would be interested to contribute with their content also do the same, or is it too early in the process to?
So essentially, if there's already a blog post and we just republish it, or is it about somebody who is not around the tag but has an idea to publish a blog post? So
both actually. Like I was talking to one who already has published a blog post that kind of is in the scope, can be in the scope for this tag, and also is interested to contribute like with some ideas. So the question is if it's okay to already kind of suggest him to create an issue, or if it would be best that he waits a little bit. Or
that's a good point. So for the first, or did I mention it as a second one? I don't know. For the point where somebody is not around in the tag but is interested in writing a blog post, of course he can, or they can just open up an issue and just propose like a scope and idea and abstract, and then we can work on a blog post. The person does not need to attend regular meetings. This is not a requirement. For the second one, I think we can republish blog posts if they are in the scope of the tag and if they kind of agree with our code of conduct and everything. So I guess we can reuse this process. I think this can be, we can also do that.
Thanks.
Any other questions towards that?
And just to follow up slightly, we do want to be welcoming to even people who can't make these meetings. I understand this is a time that's really inconvenient if you are in that time frame where you're working with both America and Europe. So I know my calendar is really full at this time. So if they want to go and write it, we're happy to work with them as long as they can meet with someone or have a discussion, or even if they can't and they just want to write and maybe use Slack or something just to get that scope nailed down. Because my concern is wandering scope. As long as it is a topic and it is clear and it is well written, we are not unlikely to accept it. We will probably take it.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right, so the next discussion item is about KubeCon and the retro. So there is an issue open, and we have some input from attendees who joined the tag meetup and in general the conference. Maybe this is a discussion item for next time because we have just 3 minutes and it will take more than 3 minutes to go through the items. So I will skip that. The next one is a KubeCon blog post. So we published the blog post, I think, a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, maybe. So it's on our tag environment sustainability website, but it will also be published on the official CNCF blog soonish. As soon as it is up, I will link it in Slack so everybody is aware. But thanks again to Nikki and Chris and everybody, or Christina, everybody who was working on the blog post, reviewing the blog post, adding their thoughts in the interview section. So I think this blog post is very nice. I like it. The next one is KCD Munich. Maybe Max, you want to say something?
Can I do advertisement session? Yay! We have
also about the meetup.
KCD Munich upcoming actually next week. Obviously, it's in Munich, Germany. 2-day event, 2 tracks, 400, hopefully 400 people. Not next week. I'm sorry, next month. Next week is in KCD Zurich. Complicated. So much KCD is happening in Europe. Nevertheless, KCD Munich in 1 month. We have already, what means already, but we have 2 talks also about sustainability. on our KCD located, as well as one full noon about community and open source and contribution. So also it's quite a nice place to go for contributing and getting started with contributing. Beside that, there will be also meetups coming up in the mid and end of June, actually 2 meetups, which also will take a look into the power efficiency, for example, but also all located in Munich. So, and I think we don't record. Maybe we need to find a sponsor for that. Is it what you wanted to hear about?
Yeah, there was like a short discussion in Slack about also meeting up maybe. So I'm not sure
This
if
we can always organize. As we are the organizer and we have a few rooms open, if some people are coming down to Munich, we can very easily organize also a fireside chat or meet and greet or brainstorming session, whatever you like to. This is the most easiest task which we can execute. And yeah, with that, if you're down to Munich, please let me know. I can also open up another discussion thread. We are running 1 minute late. Therefore, just one short question also because the next topic is we can postpone for the next meeting. Is there anything else which you would like to shortly discuss, ask, or would like to highlight? Three, two, one, sold. Perfect. With that, thank you very much for your time. I hope you can enjoy the weather. At least here in Germany, it's quite beautiful and acceptable for this time. See you on the different issues which we have in the GitHub. Don't forget to have a look at them. We have a couple of open tasks and things which we want to work on and implement it. Every of these issues need some helping hands from your side. Therefore, we're very glad about your input and contribution. Again, thank you very much, Henry, for the introduction to SCI. I'm pretty sure you can also find him somewhere else on the socials and in the GSF, GitHub, and so on and so forth. And with that, have a great day. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Bye.